I love that reporters are continually asking U.S. officials how how the most recent UN Security Council resolution is supposed to be considered non-binding when all other UN Security Council resolutions have been binding international law. When the UN Security Council passes a resolution, the resolution has the full force of international law, and all the countries have to abide by that resolution. But since it's something against the Israeli government, UN or US officials are trying to claim that the resolution is non-binding because the Israeli government is somehow special and they're allowed to break any international law or a UN Security Council resolution as they see fit. This just shows that the Israeli government does not care about UN law or international law, and nor does the United States, and both nations should be considered rogue nations.
I know you talked about this already yesterday, but I'd like to come back to it because it's a little bit mind-boggling to me. Since when is a UN resolution, a Security Council UN resolution, not non-binding? Because that's a significant shift. That's not the understanding of most countries, and it's not the understanding of the UN either. This is not a Chapter 7 resolution. So I don't get how the U.S. is now saying that it would be non-binding and basically giving the message that another country wouldn't necessarily need to comply with it.
So let me.
Yeah, this is no different than Trump saying that Russia can do whatever they want to NATO countries if they don't pay their debts, or that Putin doesn't have to laws or whatsoever. Uh, you would consider that to be insane for somebody to claim that UN resolutions are non-binding, but since it's the Israeli government and not somebody like Putin or Afghanistan or Iraq or something, the laws are said to not supposed to apply to the Israeli government. Why is this? Because the United States supports the Israeli government committing genocide.
Explain what we meant by that. First of all, as we said yesterday, and we made clear all along, we have always believed that the path to a ceasefire and the release of hostages is something that will be reached through negotiations between Israel and Hamas, enabled by.
Right. Okay, so the Israeli government says that they want to commit genocide and murder every single Palestinian man, woman, and in Gaza, as well as the West Bank. So how can there be diplomacy to stop the Israeli government from murdering every single baby in Gaza and the West Bank?
By third-party countries and in which the United States is participating, and not through a UN process, and that remains our belief. Nevertheless, when we say the resolution is non-binding, what we mean is that it does not impose any new obligations on the parties, the way, for example, some UN resolutions that.
But it does require the Israeli government to stop their genocide. It's a ceasefire. It's requiring both sides, especially requiring the Israeli government to stop murdering babies. Um, this dude, Matthew Miller, is just a fascist POS who just wants to see the death of brown people.
Impose obligatory sanctions, impose actual requirements on people to implement them. That said, we do believe that even though there are this resolution lacks non-binding provisions and lacks new requirements.
But according to UN officials, this UN resolution is binding. So we have about the abilities of the UN so that they can protect the Israeli government. Uh, the United States should be considered a rogue nation and a terrorist state, and honestly, they should be sanctioned heavily, just like any other nation that is considered a rogue state or terrorist government.
Requirements that is imposed on the parties, it does carry weight, and it is something that should be implemented.
I mean, that's a little bit contradictory, if I may. I mean, either it's binding or it's non-binding. If it's non-binding, like you said, because it lacks provisions, why would anybody comply with it?
It's non-binding in that it does not impose any new obligations on the parties, but we do believe it should be respected, that it carries weight, and that it should be implemented, as has always been the case.
It's non-binding, but we also believe that it should be respected and carried out. Okay, you're contradicting yourself. Is this a non means nations don't have to follow it, or is it a binding resolution where nations have to follow it?
Okay, has always been our belief when it comes to UN Security Council resolutions. Sure.
Okay. So if this was non-binding, now the other resolutions, the three resolutions that you vetoed, were they also in the same kind of resolution?
So, Said, I'd have to go back and look at the provisions of those, but we vetoed them, so ultimately they weren't the voice of the UN Security Council.
I'm saying if they are not binding, then why bother and veto?
Yeah, it's funny how this dude is trying to like lie his way out of everything, but like people obviously know that officials have just been constantly lying, and all they can do is continually lie, even though everybody knows that they're lying. Like the fact that UN Security Council resolutions are non-binding.
Because so they carry weight and should be implemented, and so we want to see resolutions that pass ultimately reflect the policy positions of the United States, which is what I said yesterday.
If this was a UN Security Council resolution against Russia, Biden and his officials would be screaming about the United States and the UN and everybody else should be doing as much as they could to protect Ukraine against Russia.
Yesterday, we came to the determination that this Security Council resolution, although it did contain or it lacked some provisions that we wanted to see, most notably condemning Hamas's actions on October 7th, that it called for two things that we support.
I mean, Hamas has been condemned since October 7th. So this provision of having to condemn Hamas continually is stupid. The Israeli government, they use it to defend the Israeli government by acting like if you don't continually condemn Hamas, you support Hamas, and that the UN supports Hamas and other BS, when that is not the case. That is why Hamas is considered a terrorist group, because they've been condemned for being a terrorist group. Now, it's just a matter of uh, recognizing the Israeli government as a terrorist organization as well. And this is the matter of the fact. Nothing else, nothing more.
A ceasefire and the release of hostages together. And so that's why we abstained from the resolution. We do believe that it carries weight and should be implemented.
But you know, and I remember like during the whole Iraq thing, there were 12 UN resolutions, and they were all binding. They were all binding every time, and the U.S. would be the first one to say it's binding. I mean, I worked in Iraq. I know exactly what was going on. So I'm saying that any UN resolution that passes, that is allowed to pass, is potentially can be utilized within the framework of Chapter 7.
Is there a question?
Yeah, that's a good point. The United States should be punished for any UN came to Afghanistan and Iraq. The United States genocided millions of people under the false pretense that Afghanistan and Iraq had weapons of mass destruction, and they were the architect of 9/11. Once it uh, ca- um, once it was admitted that it was a lie, the United States should have been heavily punished for their genocide, and the fact that they haven't been showcases how